Afternoon, everyone. Better. I was saying thank you for coming all the way to this different building. It's our first time here. You're used to the Weiser Hall 1010 room, but here we are with students. My name is Geneviève Zubrzitsky. I'm director of the Weiser Center for Europe and Eurasia and the Weiser Family Professor of Europe and Eurasia. And I'm very happy, proud to host Nataliya Gumenyuk today as one of our events focused on Ukraine. For the last several years, we've been doing a lot of Ukrainian programming, and this one is especially meaningful to us because for the last 2 years, we've been working, as you know, on the Reckoning Project, Ukraine Testifies, translating, editing, analyzing testimonies of victims and witnesses of potential war crimes. And the NGO that Nataliya directs, PJIL, so it's Public Journalism. Oh my gosh, I don't remember the full name.
That's simple.
Public Interest Lab is a major NGO in Ukraine, and Nataliya is a co-founder of the Reckoning Project. So we've been working here at the University of Michigan for 2 years, involving students and faculty on testimonies of victims and witnesses of the war that were collected by Nataliya and her team. So extremely important work that she and her colleagues are doing in Ukraine. So Nataliya Gumenyuk is a prominent Ukrainian journalist and author specializing in conflict reporting. She's the founder and CEO of the Public Interest Journalism Lab, PIJL, which promotes constructive discussion around complex social issues. After the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, Gumenyuk pivoted to frontline media reporting, and with her team, she co-founded the Reckoning Project, Ukraine Testifies, which documents war crimes and crimes against humanity committed by Russia. So not only documenting, but also then working on bringing those responsible for those crimes to justice. In 2023, under Gumenyuk's leadership within the Connecting the Continents initiative, PIJL brought to Ukraine senior editors, public intellectuals, and journalists from Latin America, Africa, and Asia. As a foreign news correspondent, she has reported from over 50 countries. She's actually in the US here because she's covering the US elections. So she attended last night, she attended the rally in Burns Park, the Harris Waltz rally. And then this morning she shifted gears and attended a rally in Saginaw of J.D. Vance. So she might have some wisdom to share with us today on that experience. She has been reporting on the invasion of Crimea since 2014, as well as on the conflict in eastern Ukraine since that period. She regularly writes for Foreign Affairs, The Guardian, The Atlantic, and The Washington Post, and she also contributes to Rolling Stone, Die Zeit, and Vanity Fair, and provides, in addition to that, a commentary for CNN, MSNBC, Sky News, Radio Monocle 24, I don't know that one, sorry, and other media outlets. She is the voice of Ukraine in a way for people outside of Ukraine. And she's also the author of several documentaries and books, including The Lost Island, Tales from the Occupied Crimea, which she published in 2020, and The Maidan Tahrir on the development after the Arab Spring of protests in Ukraine, as well as co-author of The Scariest Days of My Life, The Dispatches from the Reckoning Project. Gumenyuk was the co-founder and head of the independent Ukrainian Hromadske TV and Hromadske International, and she's currently a board member of those. In 2022, she was the recipient of the Media Freedom Award and a 2022 NED, the National Endowment for Democracy, their special award, the Democracy Award. She also received the 2022 Hans-Joachim Friedrichs Prize. And today she's going to be speaking about the work she's doing in Ukraine, crimes, not tragedies, reporting the Russian war against Ukraine. So we're extremely lucky to have Nataliya with us, and please join me in offering a very warm welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah? Yes. Thank you so much for being here at this time. There are so many of you, and thank you so much, the Wiser Center for Europe and Eurasia, not just for our cooperation, but this invitation. It's my second day in Michigan, but I really feel here more than at home because there are people I know, there are people I've seen on Zoom, there are people who do a lot of work, so I'm really, really glad, and I hope to give a bit back. So within this talk or lecture, I, of course, would speak about the situation in Ukraine and our reporting and our work on the reckoning projects, on the war crime documentation. But I also want to say that we do not want to narrow the view on Ukraine just as on the place of tragedy. Therefore, we agreed that this talk would be a bit broader. We would speak about human tragedies, but we also would speak on something, on the second topic, which is fascinating while reporting this horrible war, in particularly on why I would argue the democracy makes countries stronger, and why a democracy fighting back actually has more chances and is able to defend itself. Why the tolerance, pluralism, and complexity of the society is not a problem, but vice versa, the strengths which pull this society together, and instead of individuals who could be easily broken, creates a network of people which is very hard to crash even for such a mighty country as Russia. So I'll be happy to answer the questions, and there would be a number of the direction I work. But I really should start that I'm journalist based in Kyiv full-time. I'm traveling quite a lot around the country, but for the last year also a lot globally to share our story, to explain what's going on, to find the connections between the different people who suffer, to actively search for this solidarity and even sometimes express our own. And you know, I'm frontline reporter. I'm in the profession for over 20 years. It's my 5th American elections. I've been coming to everyone since 2008, when I came for the first time to US and was reporting from Chicago, and not just Chicago and Arizona. And I'm following closely what's going on in your country, and it matters for me. But I always wanted to become a conflict reporter. And when I was a student, it felt something very exotic at distance. There was never war in Ukraine. The last war we had, it was the Second World War. And our country was just too poor and too insular to care about foreign wars. It was something we couldn't afford. That's what was said. So in 2012, when I was freelancing already, at that time I left the commercial media, and because we have authoritarian government of Yanukovych in 2010, so I was freelancing and still talked to the previous editor of the major Ukrainian TV channel, saying like, I'm going to the US. And he said like, Nataliya, why should anybody care in Ukraine who is the president of the US? I was like, okay, I'll still go. It's very unfortunate for me today that we all care, even to the extent that the American magazine asked me to write for them about the American elections. It's also very unfortunate that I happen to report the war in my own country and have to learn that the wars can come not because there is a historic precondition, but because somebody just wants to break the international law, express his might, and the wars can be really unprovoked. And for quite a lot of years, I worked in all these processes connected to peace negotiations, all kind of reconciliation process. Transitional justice is something also in my profile. And I really can say that, we didn't want this war. But if you pushed into that, you need to defend yourself. There is no other way. And skipping, I'm not going to tell you, my kind of background. I'm just telling an important chapters to understand the thinking we have. Since 2014 at Hromadske, we were, as independent Ukrainian TV station, we were very much closely reporting the occupation of Crimea and the war in the eastern Ukraine. But what we felt very strongly that the modern audience and the digital audience, it's very hard to catch their attention with the tragic human rights stories. We did everything we could. We had Josip Sevenke here, who did with us the 3D photo exhibition and documentary, a totally new format. So we did a lot in order to find all kind of ways how you address the audience, which we believe cares about something else, but we still believe that human rights value. And there were a lot of talks about fake news in Ukraine. I do remember when I was in Crimea, and I think at that time when I was telling this story, audiences abroad couldn't believe that I would tell such a surreal story. I would come to occupied Crimea. And at that time, it was just few months after the invasion, I was kind of reported not candidly. And there was a rumors, because Crimea is so dependent on the Ukrainian rivers, that in fact, there was an argument that Crimea cannot be separated, it depends on the Ukrainian water. So there were the rumors in the village, and I was the witness how two villages would stand and argue, because one would say, but there is an underground lake in our village, therefore we are not afraid of separation. And the other would say, but there is no underground lake in our village. And I find it surreal. And I kept on telling this story 2015, 2016 for different international audiences. Everybody laughed always. But unfortunately, I should say, we ended up in the moment when it's not a surprise for so many societies to listen about the fact that somebody says something which is clearly not true, but that is an argument about that. But what I also believed, that at some point the term fake news or like all kind of fake stories which were spread was also, let's say, hijacked, and also, everything Ukraine says about the war, Russia would say, these are fake news. We also have that. But what we learned when with my colleague, Angelina Karyakina, we were co-founding the Public Interest Journalism Lab, it was in 2020, because we wanted to move a bit and understood that it's not just about the debunking, it's really the fact that let's say, that there are people, regimes, those who fight the democracies, who are, what they're trying to do, they are using vulnerabilities of each society. So it's not that they're just creating a new stories. They're looking what really is painful for the society and trying to dig into these wounds and make them bigger and misuse them. And that's why a lot of weird stories are appearing about the war, about the conflict. People are made scared, frightened. And we moved to the social research, and we moved to talking to the focus group, doing the studies and trying to figure out how we really tell these human rights stories in a way when the other side doesn't feel that they are manipulated. We needed to address the stories about what's going on to the audiences in occupied Crimea, in occupied part of the eastern Ukraine. And we couldn't just bluntly say, you are lied, you are brainwashed. We needed to find the way, because it's very nice to speak to the people who agree to you, but we wanted a bit of the breakthrough and fight against that. And so we always trying to work with various people from various professions in order to, bring a bit more sense to journalism. So when the full-scale invasion started, together with our colleagues, Peter Pomerantsem, whom I knew before for quite some time, but also a person who I didn't know before, but we were lucky to meet each other, Janine Di Giovanni, who also given the talk and who introduced the Reckoning Project to the Wiser Center. So we really started to work on something else. And what is the Reckoning Project? I wouldn't go into the much details. Journalists can talk to anybody, and journalistic stories sometimes are challenged. We talk to direct survivors of the war crimes and witnesses of the potential war crimes. So every single person to whom our team talk can potentially testify in court. And we talk in such a nuanced and neutral way that it cannot be challenged. We talk to a few people, we verify, we ask for consent. And these testimonies are transcribed, translated. Partially, the Michigan University also working on making them, a really very important archive, and they are used for articles in the international media, in Ukrainian media, in the media globally, to the films, but also they're used by the lawyers to work to the prosecutors, to Ukrainian prosecutors, to international lawyers. But we also believe, especially in this team, I should say, that they would be preserved for the history. And not just for the future memorials, because I treat that not as a culture project, but rather as a way to fight a potential crime of denial. Because we know today that quite a lot of horrible things which happened globally and during even the recent history can be denied some years after, even though we believe it's totally impossible. And by now, our team has talked to over 500 survivors. It's quite a number, and by that time we can probably get already some summaries, see some patterns, and I want you to show a short video which is based on our testimonies, a general overview. Sorry, it's not that graphic as it could be. It's actually the version which is okay to see in the student auditorium, but I want you to see some of these testimonies.
Ну і вони кажуть, і мама приїдь. І все. А мама тоді якраз прийшла, і вони мене забрали. Мені страшно було. Я не восприймав це. Я не думав, що це по-настоящему.
Ту картину, яку побачила я, коли заглянула туди, де це спортзал, де сама більша кімната, оце справжнє пекло. Пекло в тому вигляді, в якому малюють на старовинних іконах. В світлі, в такому приглушеному, чисто від свічок, постаті людей один коло одного сидять.
Меня привели. Сразу заковали наручники сзади, усадили, заковали наручники сзади и подсоединили к пальцам. Я знал, что это будет, и как-то внутренне готовился к этому. Но, тем не менее, я, честно говоря, думал, что это как-то не настолько болезненное ощущение.
Опять по 6 человек с резиновыми дубинками заковывают тебя в наручники, подключают электроток, поливают тебя водичкой и вот как бы выбивают из себя показания вот таким образом. Пытки электротоком называлось «позвонить Ленину» или «звонок Ильичу». Вся комната эта, она просто была заляпана кровищей.
Темно-темно, таке все чорне, і ноутбуки горять. А вони всі розкидані, а ось ця заставка, вона, типу, вона циклічно крутиться, вона не виключається. Типу. І я вже розвертаюсь. От сидить Андрюша Красюк, продавець. І він тягне руку, типу, Славка, помоги. Каже, Андрюшин, давай, ми під час йдемо, сонечко, виходимо, давай потихеньку цей. А він кричить, я не можу. Він знову падає, і я розумію, що якась є травма на нозі. Андрюшу забрали, і він в лікарні помер.
Ну, на данный момент вы можете так видите, вот это все, это очень хреново на самом деле. Это все нефтепродукты. Там был пляж, там набережная, там вообще балдежно классно. Но на самом деле после потопления неизвестно, что там находится на земле. То есть они шминировали берег, и, соответственно, когда вода поднялась, все эти мины, вот это все, оно тоже поднималось, и неизвестно, оно осталось, не осталось.
And I talked that we talked to over 500 people already, but this is just a small chunk of those Ukrainians who suffered. And in this video, you could see the figure, 140,000 alleged war crimes registered by the Ukrainian General Prosecutor Office. The sad part is that we are trying to speak to the people who are not covered by the prosecutors. We, by the way, try to find the more difficult stories. And currently, when there is occupation, especially the longer occupation of the part of the Ukrainian territory, there are more people who are saying that we didn't talk to the law enforcement people. So this number is bigger. However, I've been giving a lecture in one of the universities in Mexico. And when I was there, I also was meeting, because usually when we go somewhere, we also try to learn about these societies, because we also know the problems are elsewhere. And in Mexico, there is a huge story with the domestic violence. And I've been speaking to the people who are from the Commission of the Disappeared. And they told me 100,000 people has considered to be disappeared and missing in Mexico since 2007. 50,000 of them within the last 5 years. And I was puzzled. What should I tell to the people who have these numbers? Why they should all of a sudden care about Ukraine? Why? And when we were discussing that, and it's not something I figure out myself, I needed to have a very honest conversation with my Mexican colleagues, asking like, help me, how can I address that? And then we figure out exactly what is the title of this talk. We said like, you know what is the difference, Natalia? You document them, you go to the prosecutors, you record, you write, and we given up. We actually don't start to prosecute. We treat it as a norm. People disappear, and we just take this violence as something for granted. And you, during the war, you don't do that. Therefore, we kind of inspired of you. I was very inspired and grateful for this answer, which also helps me to tell this story to the rest of the world, thanks to my Mexican colleagues. Because then I would say, indeed, we journalists often treat the crimes and we treat all these atrocities which are happening, missiles attack, deportation of the children, tortures, as tragedies. But if you really treat that things as tragedies, you sometimes feel powerless. You can do nothing about that. You have this empathy fatigue. You just can't handle it, just too much. For us, it's all crimes. And when it's crimes, it means the other thing. It means somebody is responsible. It means somebody should be kept accountable. And if so, there is something I can do about that. I can figure out who it was. I can bring some justice. I can preserve this memory. And that's what keeping us, our team, everybody, and most of the Ukrainians pretty much determined, because we feel we can do something about that. That's why I given this talk to this lecture. But also what we're trying to explain, and I'll be also very practical, within the Reckoning Project, we started to work on the various types of we started like with the precondition that there are missile attacks and occupation, and people in the occupation are maybe detained, abducted. But then we figure out there is a new crime, a deportation of children. 19,000 of them, it's believed by the Ukrainian state, are taken away. The Yale the Conflict Observatory Laboratory says that way more. So the figure of the 19,000, it's smaller. After the explosion on the dam in one of the Ukrainian hydroelectric power station in southern Ukraine. We started to work and figure out how do we record the crimes against nature, environment. What do we do when the nuclear power stations are occupied? It didn't happen previously in the history. So in all our endeavors, we're trying to look and, but what is also very important, and I'm slowly moving to the second part of our talk, so it's not just about the documenting war crimes, but looking at Ukraine and what it does. So yes, we change our view. So for instance, you've seen one of the clips on the attacks on the shopping mall in the town of Kremenchuk in central Ukraine. It's far away from the front line. 22 people died during that attack. It was summer 2002, the first summer, where we were still very kind of sensitive to these attacks. Yesterday, in the center of Kharkiv, second biggest city, at night, the architectural jewelry of Ukraine, the building of the 1920s, one of the first Ukrainian, let's say, high, tall buildings, was attacked. Our friends, also who started with us with the recording project, has the office in the entrance 5. And when I wrote him in the morning, how are you? She said, like, we're in the, that was an entrance 7. We're in the entrance 5. Everybody's okay, everything fine, there is no water, we're going on working. It doesn't mean that we accepted that, but something has happened since then, because it's true that after the, since 2022, Ukraine is almost on daily basis attacked by the Russian missiles of different kinds. But Ukraine got the air defense, and this air defense on every single day saves thousands of lives. And Ukraine would ask for that defense as long as it's necessary, just because it's not like we are not attacked. Ukraine managed to preserve yourself also thanks to the defense weapon it has. And there are numerous answers. So there is one answer, by the way. We figure out what for us also was very important, that the people who were behind this attack in Kremenchuk, they were doing the very similar attack like a month after, half a year after, from the very same basement. That was the case opened by the Ukrainian general prosecutors. International Criminal Court issued the 6 arrest warrants, including 4 of them for the key military leadership of Russia Federation for attacks on the infrastructure. So it's not really something has happened, something could happen. And for us, one way, that's what we can do as journalists, speak about accountability, demand these trials, have the evidence that these people are responsible, but also, call for something which can really defend the human lives. I remember very well, and that's why we are so determined, because there were some people saying, why you are doing that while the war is still there? And I talked to one lady also who survived, luckily, the attack on the train station in Kramatorsk. It's another town. There were 59 people died at one day. It was a very brutal attack with a very specific munition aimed not against the military equipment, but against the people. That's what we figure out. And I asked, and in our project, it's very loud title, Reckoning. And we have the colleagues, like our dear colleague Janindi Giovanni, who covered the wars in Rwanda. We have our colleagues from Syria. For them, it's a lot about accountability, about the past crimes. People, the Russians were not stopped in Georgia. They were not stopped in Chechnya. They were not stopped in Syria, so they came to Ukraine. And if they're not stopped in Ukraine, by the way, they would go on somewhere else, what we see. Because we do see the very same people, doing various things globally in different continents, because impunity brings more impunity. But I talked to this lady and asked, so what do you want? Her husband has died in a horrible condition, and she happens to be a very religious, conservative volunteer who believes in God and who doesn't believe in the reckoning, kind of like that way. It's just God who'll punish these people. So I asked her, so why do you talk to us? Why you agreed to be filmed? And she said, yes, I don't ask for punishment for these people, but my life is destroyed. and I want to stop it. So somebody else's life is not destroyed. So for us, and for me personally, coming maybe from a different generation, coming from the country where it's the first war for me, it's really about the prevention of what's going on. And I feel we can do that. There is something what I want also to say a bit more about the occupation, and then I would go for something, for different topic. 20%, today there are quite a lot of discussion about, all kind of the peace negotiations and other things. It's easy to say, but what Ukrainians are very much concerned that the time which Ukraine was negotiating with Russia since 2014 till 2022, and I was at a lot of this meeting, informal meetings, including with the Russians, was used to militarize Crimea, to bring more weapons to Crimea, to build the bridge through which the tanks are coming to attack Ukraine, to create the military zone in our favorite resort, to create these cities like Donetsk, where in 2012, I might be mistaken, 2012 it was a European championship of the soccer championship. But in 2010, yes, it was a very rich guy in Ukraine, the Donetsk oligarch, but Beyonce was opening that stadium. Donetsk was a town where Beyonce was singing in the stadium. We can imagine that. And I would remember, but the kids who are younger don't remember. It's a place which is the place of terror, the place where which became a military base. But what we now know that in those 19, almost 20% of the Ukraine is under the Russian occupations. From the testimonies we collect, we know that people of all kind of vocations, people of all professions, students, farmers, women, younger, elderly, they are suspected to be the resistance, the people who are, just by the mere fact that they are Ukrainian, that they can be detained, they can be abducted, and absolute majority of the people we've spoken, just our tiny organization, over 100 people, more than, I think up to now, over 200 people to whom we talked were tortured. Almost everybody who was in the detentions. And when I talked to one of the wives of the survivors from a town of Berdyansk, she said something very emblematic to me. So I asked, why do you think your husband has been, detained? He happens to be, a Baptist. These people are also under the particular, because it's a very organized community of volunteers. So he was probably suspicious, but she said, it's enough in occupation to have your own opinion, to be abducted and detained. It doesn't matter which opinion. The mere fact you have your opinion is already the risk. And there why I'm coming to Ukraine, and why I think that's very important, and why it's so hard for us not even to reconcile by Russia. We are living in the country which got independence in 1991. It has all the problems with democracy. However, we are the country which was quite a democratic state when it's normal to have your own opinion. I was born with the idea I have one, I should have one, and it can be different. And disregarding, we fought for that. We had the Orange Revolution in 2004. We had the Euromaidan Revolution in 2014. We had the whole generation which just happened to grow up with own opinions. And it's not somebody which is put on us from the top. It's not a presidential order. So one of the particular stories I was focusing myself is the occupation of the Ukrainian villages. And we figure out during the first year, it was the article I wrote myself with Anne Applebaum for The Atlantic, that at that time in the occupied region of Kherson, which has 49 smaller regions, the representatives, the local authorities out of 47 out of 49 were either detained or abducted or needed to go to the exile. That was 1 year after the full-scale invasion. We started to follow up. All local authorities in all the towns and the villages were in some kind of way attacked, during the occupation. And when I met a lot of them, a very simple local villagers, people, I really understand that there is some problem, like it's a genuine problem. Those people were elected by their communities as the leaders of the communities. It's just in their mind to think that Ukrainian is the language we talk. This is the country I live. Nobody told me to, to be against Russia. We just don't understand why we are occupied. And the Russian soldiers which are coming suspect, because they do have a bit of the different mindset, because they didn't live in the democracy for the last 20 years compared to us, they really suspect that it cannot be. It just cannot be. There cannot be an official which is not forced to tell something by his government or the security service. And this is a very unfortunate clash which creates a lot of violence, but it's also the answer that you cannot suppress those people. Our lawyers, our analysts, who by chance are also Syrians, for whom it's not their war, but this is a war they want they want the accountability. They agree at this stage, reading through so many of our testimonies, that this is a war against population. It's not the war against army. And the attack on the population to subdue this population is actually, the way to fight this war. It's clearly a very immoral one. But the point is that the good thing that our strengths is also, this, I would say, like maybe somebody would say it's our weakness, but I should also say it's maybe our strengths. Because that is also the reason why it's very hard to break Ukraine. In 2021, close to the 30 years of the Ukrainian independence, together with the ARENA program, we did a sociological studies of Ukrainians from all over backgrounds, including in some in the occupied territories, because a lot of people were speaking about the very polarized country, and we were looking at what unites Ukrainians. There were a lot of good things. Ukrainians are very much united by the fact that they're very much resilient, but there was one thing which we felt was a very important reason why people believe in the conspiratorial conspiracies in propaganda, because they often said, nothing depends on us. They kind of didn't have this feeling of empowerment. What was for me striking this summer, we did a very different activity. So in one of the regions in the southern Ukraine, we gathered the villagers from occupied territories, non-occupied territories, those who are, those who are in exile. And they were discussing themselves, how they rebuild, how they go back, what would happen. And what I understand with them, there were people of various political views. They were very adamant. They were very kind of people who would understand. There were people who would think like, all people who provide schooling in the occupation are traitors. But there were people who saying there is no other opportunity rather than to teach kids math, even if you are, under the Russian authorities. And but what was for me very interesting, there was a very active debate in this room, and there was a man who was probably, I would say, the most radical. He has the most critical position. Everybody should be punished. Everybody is guilty. He demanded too much from everybody. And the moderator put kind of an exercise when we were discussed opportunity of the so-called lynch trials. Like, are you okay for the lynch trials if the accountability doesn't come, if the Ukrainian courts don't deliver accountability? And most of these villagers were totally against. And this radical man, to my mind, was the most opposed. And I said, like, why? You kind of the most critical. You demanded the punishment for everybody. And he said, like, but I believe in forgiveness. It was a totally different logic. Not the ones of the liberal lawyer, but they were together. And it was beautiful for me to see that. But what was very important, there were all these people, priests, of various denominations. There were non-religious people, local village heads, teachers, and all were very, very much care about their view on how this country have to pursue. And I would remind you, we are a country at war. They want their voice to be heard. And then I understood something else, that this empowerment we were very unfortunate to be empowered with being and implementing our citizenship. Because practicing democracy and being active citizens, it's something which, if you do, it cannot be taken back. Because of the war in Ukraine, every villager either volunteered, he brought food, he hosted the refugees, he probably helped, most probably he sent his kids to the army or went to serve himself. Probably almost everybody on this local level in Ukraine had did something, not for his family so, but for the larger community. They did that, therefore they think they have the right, and they have the right to say, and they ask for this right to say. Therefore, on the third year of war, I feel that Ukraine is an extremely democratic place, despite we don't have the elections. It's very interesting, but it can be paradoxical, but that's the case. And that's my point, that if you really practice some democratic action, you really can't give it back. And this is also my hope for every single place I visit, even today. So, what is also for me very important, we often, I know I'm finishing soon, I still have some kind of like over 10, 15 minutes for my talk. A lot of people sometimes think that where there is a pluralism, you need to have an opinion, then the country would, especially during the war, you probably would, make decisions faster. And Ukraine being a democracy, it cannot be that fast in decisions like Vladimir Putin, who is all alone. But I remember a very strange story. So I met the governor of Kharkiv, the second biggest region on the Russian border. And he told me that thing. In Ukraine during the war, there is a martial law. So actually the governor is given a lot of rights, way more than before. And the governors are appointed by the president. So the mayor is elected and the government is appointed. The governor can do wherever. And at that day in particular, he told me that he met with the mayor and they were discussing whether they need to close down open the subway, because during the first months of the war, the subway in Kharkiv served as a basement, as a shelter. But they needed to understand that kids need to study somewhere. That's a different story. I'm saying that because now in Kharkiv, in some of the subway, they're building the schools. But they understood that people are coming back to the town and the subway should work. So they didn't know. Should they really open the subway so the people would risk and they return to their houses? And he said that they needed the mayor to consult. He could have taken this decision herself. He has the right, legal right, but still he decided it's better to consult. That's why I always think that such of the decision taken together, and we do take a lot of decisions like that in Ukraine, are probably stronger. A lot of people always talked about Ukraine as a very divided country as well. And we wanted to be united. Like more monolithic countries in Eastern Europe, they are. We thought that it's our curse. But today I'm looking at the very sad story for me, which is happening in Georgia, in the country of Georgia, where it happened that they have the rigged elections, but the country is literally owned by one oligarch. It's just one person. Nobody could compare. We have this competitive oligarchy where these oligarchs from different regions of the country fought for their interest. And we thought it's destroying our society. But I do believe today that it was not good, but it was something which preserved Ukrainian society pluralistic. And 11, 12, yes, so I'm moving there. So that's why I really think that all those things which somehow people sometimes see as our weaknesses of Ukraine turn out to be our strengths, in particular our ethnic diversity. Yes, Russia is attacking Ukrainian culture and Ukrainian language. And it's true that in one of the horrible stories, it was also the story of the occupation collected within the Reckoning Project, at early stage of the war, in one of the village, 300 70 people were kept in basement of the school, a tiny basement of the school, for 1 month. And the story I remembered very well when the people asked for toilet paper. The Russians has brought them books, school books, textbooks, but they're very specific books. The books of the Ukrainian history and the Ukrainian language and the Ukrainian literature, not any other books. So it's definitely the attack on the Ukrainian culture. But it's not just an ethnic attack, because if you're really active citizens, you're Ukrainian Jew, Ukrainian Crimean Tatar, Muslim, Ukrainian Armenian, I met all of them, Greek, Bulgarian, you can be attacked as well for your political position. So it's not about attacking just one nation, it's really an attack on the political nation. Because I would claim, and there is too much for me to go, it would be too much aside from this talk, but I'm covering politics in Ukraine. What I understand a lot about my society, what Ukrainians hate the most, some of them, quite a lot of us, it's when they are told what is exactly the right Ukrainian. It's up to me to decide. I can be very different. So I think there is some idea of the political nation, political identity of Ukraine. Because why I'm speaking about this identity thing, because I'm also now where I am, and I'm a bit, I've seen a lot of international journalists coming from Ukraine and saying, is it a birth of the Ukrainian identity? And I think it is. But I want us not to mistake the tribalism for strive for the kind of your language, your identity, your culture. But I also would be cautious about telling that, Ukrainians are better than somebody else. We just happen to be in very unfortunate situation, because I remember somebody would say Ukrainians are heroic. No, we just pushed to be in the situation where we need to survive. And I hope nobody lives through that, but I believe a lot of other people would be like that as well. But for me, the story which I'm following is beyond the war crimes, the ones which is also the key for me, is a story, what I believe is new. It's not the birth of the Ukrainian identity. It's for the first time in the history, Ukraine has its own state, which is not hostile to its population. And we are little by little learning. We happen to live in the country which was under the foreign rule, Tsarist, was under the communist rule, not always foreign, by the way. The Ukrainians were there also in the government, but it was authoritarian country. Early 90s, quite a oligarchic business, politics. So it was quite a hostile, also, partially controlled by Moscow governance. And little by little, since 2004, since 2014, we have our own state. And for the first time, Ukrainians feel that their state is there to protect them, not to attack. And we understood that there was a lot of, after 2014, after the Euromaidan revolution, there was a lot of tension, civil society against the government. And I'm representative of the independent television from the civil society, still rethinking the idea that it's not either or. At such a time, for us, it's really about kind of this figuring our way. What is the role of the state? What is the role of the society? How we rely on each other? Because yes, we are very proud that volunteers provide, support to the Ukrainian army, but there should be army first. There couldn't be ever volunteers if we won't have the healthcare system to treat the wounded. Ukraine is capable Ukrainian cities are capable to live because there are rescue workers, because there are the people who are cleaning the streets after every attack. They are paid by taxpayers' money. They are paid, by the way, by a lot of international money, international support. But we do live our life. I think that and Ukrainians are proud of their state. It's not just about the country. And I do think you would understand me if you would remember what did you think about the healthcare workers during the first months of COVID? That's how we feel about our state today, about our state officials. It doesn't mean there are no problems, by the way. But therefore, I'm coming to the topic that the reforms were pivotal to be where we are. So, for instance, I would argue that if Ukrainian army didn't reform itself in 2014, who knows? if Russia attacked us in 2022, and it would be like old post-Soviet corrupt army? I don't know. Maybe we would be where Afghanistan is. It's not given. It's something. I do remember how I was afraid of the Ukrainian police. I was reporting the Maidan. Those people were targeting civilians. They are responsible of the murder of over 80 civilians. But we did reform our police. And now, so odd to me to say, when I see the people in the uniform, I feel defended. I feel safe. And my Russian husband, who is Russian by his citizenship and is a journalist, also said, like, it's so strange, he lives in Ukraine, he said, like, it's so strange. I really feel safe seeing people in uniform, which is a very, very weird feeling for somebody coming from this independent television, civil society movement. And I think that is critically important. So, recently, I also heard, and I'm still going on a bit about the democracy, but I can't avoid that because, why I'm saying this is important. So sometimes quite a lot of people, when I travel abroad, ask us, why do you not give up? The Russia is so mighty. And I would always say, we survived as a people when we didn't have our own country. How we can dare not to if we have one? We can do everything in our interest. And so in this regard, there are a couple of points which I won't make, but I cover them in the question and answers. There is a way to do that. I really think that, and I argue, that quite a lot of people internationally asking me why disproportionately Ukraine is supported. It's not, I really appreciate the support, and we really value support in the US, a lot of countries in Europe, Britain, Germany, Scandinavia, a lot of countries, Japan. But I would always say, where would we be if we hadn't fought for our democracy? Who would be with us if we would be a guerrilla? If it won't be a democratic country, which you kind of trust? Would Ukrainian army would be trusted? Would our society would be trusted? And would our business be, operational and won't abandon the government if, it won't trust it? So this really makes me to end up with the argument that I do believe that in the long run, even in the most critical state, it's not actually democracy and pluralism makes you more strong and resilient. And if you're in the society which lived through that, you cannot give it away. It's not something you just can't forget, being a citizen. Therefore, I'm hopeful. I'm usually a big optimist in every single room, but I would end up rather with Václav Havel quote or a phrase, I won't remember a quote exactly, that it's not about being optimistic. We are optimistic about our future, but we are hopeful. And the difference is, optimistic, you just believe that something good will happen. Being hopeful is also doing something and doing our best that the things would be better. Thank you so much for the attention.
We have about 20 minutes for Q&A and microphones. I would ask that I'm sure there was a lot of questions, and you be brief in your questions.
Thank you so much for your interesting presentation. I'm actually interested in this Ukrainian matter and affairs because I am doing the research in illegal market activity in the post-Soviet countries like Ukraine, Donbas, and I published some of the article about the politicization of intellectual property rights in the Donbas, Crimea by the Russian side. Besides, I remember that I had a presentation about the weaponization of the media diplomacy in Ukraine by Russia in Vytautas Magnus University in Lithuania. And I got some kind of implication that whether we are trying to comparing the differences between the weaponization of the media in 2014 and 2022, I think that in terms of the scale and the differences, there is a big kind of differences. And from a journalistic perspective, how you can differ this weaponization of the media and the, let's say, the intense exploitation of the media in the Ukraine side in 2014 during the annexation of the Crimea. And also this 2022. What is the big difference about this and how the journalists try to approach for this issue? And another important thing that, yes, just one, can I? One question. Yes, okay.
Yes, thank you. That's already a long question.
I'll try to be brief in a way. So I've been speaking about all this kind of disinformation, fake news for quite a while. But I think there are two things. There is one way how the information is weaponized in the non-democratic countries inside this, and the other way how you misuse it, and the totally different tactics which are used in the, let's say, democratic societies. That's why I would never, compare Fox News to RT, as some people do. I'm not very much into this, but whataboutism. Because what I believe in case of Russia, you can speak about the call for genocide. You can speak about the call for hatred in the rhetorics of the Kremlin television. But what is also important, they do have the army, and they do have the weapon. And if it was just the media, probably that won't be happening. And the good news is that in 2014, I remember I came in 2016 to the US, or maybe 15 for the first time, a year and a half after Crimean occupation. And I would be still asked by CNN journalists whether there was a referendum in Crimea. And I'm like, why I need to explain that? And later, when I had a chance to interview the head of the American general, he was actually the head of the NATO forces in Europe. And I said, did you know it was Russia? And he said, yes, we knew, just some of our allies kind of in NATO didn't really, agree to speak about that. And I said, but why we spent a year trying to persuade the world that there was no kind of referendum, it was a military occupation, which was proven by European Court of Justice. So I think I'm maybe not clearly answering your question, but I think that there is one way how the dictatorship are working in the places where they can use both weapon and the military force inside their societies, like in Russia and Belarus, shut down, close, arrest, detain, attack. It's a kind of a very complicated operation with intelligence involved, with economic interest involved, all going together. So it's a special operation. It's not just like the freedom of speech. And there is a different way how the vulnerabilities of each societies are used, and in particularly in order to kind of polarize societies and put people against each other and confuse people and make them believe things which don't exist. And that would be the fertile ground for further things. Yes.
So in this country, when we want to evaluate a case or what you suggested, democracy, we go back to the Constitution and what it says and what does it base the structure of the politics and the society. It's the Constitution. Is there a Constitution for Ukraine?
Yes, Ukraine has a constitution. It was written in 1996. We cherish it as well. And it's provided a lot of freedoms, and I respect every constitution globally. But I also would say ours has been written in 1990s and it's incorporated quite a lot of good things because a lot has been already developed by that time.
My second question is, you suggested this environmental effects of war and how you are looking at it. Is that included in the Constitution? The rights of the environment.
I wouldn't pretend I know. I'm not a lawyer but we do have, maybe there would be people who know, because there is a so I see quite a fellow Ukrainians nodding. So we do have. What do we have? Help me, please.
We have a right for environment clear and unpoisoned environment. So it's one of basic things. Yeah.
So, but I would add also, because Ukraine has survived the Chernobyl nuclear disaster in 1986 and environmental movement was very strong in the 90s. So it was like very, very important in the legislation. So I cannot by heart, Ukrainian constitution is compared to the American, it's actually bigger. It's like you can't remember it all. It's like, it's really long. But we're working on there is pretty robust environmental legislation in Ukraine, particularly also because of our unfortunate history.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hello, my name is Stanislav. I worked on Ukrainian TV stations, and I know that at the beginning of the war, news TV marathon started, and all news in Ukraine now all the same on all TV stations. A lot of criticism about this recently. What do you think? Do they need to continue this TV marathon? Is it useful for the news media field, or what's your thoughts?
Okay, I have pretty strong opinion on that myself, but not very conventional in Ukraine. So first of all, I would explain what it is. Would you imagine 4 hours of the Fox News, after that 4 hours of CNN, after that 4 hours of something else, and they are on the same kind of like network, 4 hours after 4 hours. That's how our TV channels, which were also heavily politicized, very politically biased, owned by different political owners, kind of couldn't be together during the war. There was little resources, so they created this joint marathon where, you know, like they're divided 4 hours, 4 hours, 4 hours. I do think it's outdated because country situation kind of stabilized. It didn't become better, but it's going on. There is a particular agreement between these channels inside a very complex situation with their competition. I do think it is a bit kind of way too, not hopeful, but over-optimistic in the way how they portray the war. Majority of the Ukrainians get their news online anyways. The concern is that if people see a bit too cheerful news, I would say like, it's not really like something, it's just a bit too cheerful, let's say like that, way too emotional. They turn out to go to YouTube, to bloggers, to all kind of like people, and they search for the people who would confirm their biases. Those people who want to believe that Ukraine would win tomorrow would go and would see military experts with millions of views who every day would say how we're winning the war. They still go there. Those who kind of are skeptical and would think that we already need to give up go to that type of conspiracy theories. My problem is with that. Before the war, I mean, I left commercial media in 2010. I'm pretty critical of them. I think that they were really kind of owned by the oligarchs. They were owned by the political interest. I strongly believe in the public broadcaster idea in Ukraine, which is neutral, which is our organization is called Public Interest Journalism Lab. So I really believe that the media are service, it's not business. And I should say, if you disbundle this marathon, we just would have 5 or 6 bad TV stations, which would tell the same, but on the 5 different frequencies. But I do think it should die out, just because I don't believe the reason why it should be one and why it should receive some kind of support. So my problem with that is, how do we return the people to the quality news? To the, let's say, proper, mainstream, strong, quality news, because those people don't go to independent media, a large chunk of the population, and they are not competing, these big channels, they are not competing with the independent media. People from them are kind of going to this kind of different type of the YouTubers, bloggers, all kind of things. So I do think the only way is really support of the strong public broadcaster with particular rules and the neutrality, where there would be more quality, you know, local news. So there is a way out, but it's not just like, either you dismantle. I don't think it makes more harm. It would be exactly the same, even there would be 5 of them. Yes.
I have 2 questions, but really quick. Just following up on that, in a wartime environment, do you think you really could have enough financial resources and enough professional journalists to actually carry out very independent journalism. It's a very difficult environment. Second question, you really spoke a lot about democratic resilience today and its capacity to be the bulwark against new hybrid warfare tactics. And I agree with you, and I'm doing a study on it, comparing authoritarian regimes and democratic regimes. So my interest there is part of the Reckoning Project is about accountability and transparency into these war crimes. Where does the ICC or ICJ or Hague or the potential for opening up a Nuremberg-style trial in court, where does that stand today? Because I'm losing track. It's become really difficult to follow for me. Thank you.
Trying to be brief. No, we don't have much resources. Ukrainian independent media are largely supported by international donors, just because the country doesn't have money. But we do have a lot of journalists who do investigate army and who investigate the unfortunate military operations. And sometimes I shocked myself because I wouldn't believe it's totally possible, like why the military would leak, like during the war. But there is something to explain also. I really think it's very important to mention, it was not in my talk. Ukraine is a very specific army. It's the army of the civilian Ukrainians. Before 2014, before the first invasion, our army was 70,000 people, and some of the generals admitted that like 5,000 of them were capable combat force, because also the Russian citizen from Moscow was running Ukrainian army in some way. So it was like the process. Till 2022, 300,000 joined the army. That was the amount on February 2022. Now our army is almost 2 million, and they are people like us, my colleagues, my friends, my family, and everybody, journalists, lawyers, bartenders, a lot of people from the village, regular people. It's a mess because it's very hard to run that big organization. Also, with the society which questions the things, so you really have the over 1.5 million civilians who all of a sudden need to follow the orders, but they don't know how to do that just because they're used to ask the questions. And so it's a really huge challenge, but that is the reason why, despite all the marathons and other things, you cannot. It's like usual people fighting this war. It's not like they feel about some particular, military dignity, the control, the kind of the rules. They are not insiders. They are all outsiders for this huge system. That's why it provides a level of pluralism. But if there is any opportunity to support Ukrainian media, please do, because of course a lot of people left. The newsrooms are bleeding. The men are not there any longer. They're all drafted, I really honestly should say that. So there are the issues. And the second was the courts. The good news, not something Ukrainians hope. Compared to quite a lot of countries, we have not perfect, but rather capable law enforcement system. There won't be anybody but us in the end investigate all these hundreds of thousands of crime. The problem that the perpetrators are mainly in different countries, so it's very hard. A lot of people are very critical and skeptical of the international courts. I'm more optimistic because the first warrant for Vladimir Putin was issued one after the full-scale invasion. And on the second year, there were already 4. And on the third year, 6 warrants. It's something. But it's not enough, so Ukraine is searching all kinds of ways. Universal jurisdictions, opening the cases in the countries which see the war crimes as such, so serious that they can investigate them, disregarding that they happened in the other territory. And I do think, so for instance, within the Reckoning Project, we filed a criminal complaint to the Federal Court of Argentina, in particular because on the case of the tortures in the occupied Ukraine, to signify that, in particular, do it in the country of so-called Global South, just to show that this crime, it's not about the West, it's not about Europe, it's not about the US. It's really about the world, and tortures cannot be tolerated anywhere. And Argentina has a very strong tradition of the investigating the crimes such as tortures because of their history. So such things are important. but I would believe they are largely symbolic. Ukraine is still asking for opening something like the special tribunal for the crime of aggression, in which the leadership of the Russia can be charged with the fact of the aggression. So it's not about like numbers of the war crimes, but in particular the crime of invading the foreign country, which is such an obvious case that a lot of people politically saying, why do you need it? It's so obvious. But maybe because it's exactly obvious, we needed to have this stamp and saying, no, it shouldn't happen anytime and anywhere else.
Yeah, thank you so much for speaking to us today. This has been wonderful. So you mentioned you've been following presidential elections in the United States since 2016 or before, and so that you've been following 2024. Do you have any thoughts on what you foresee the election results kind of doing in terms of affecting how the war is going to go? Because I think to some extent, like people think it's pretty clear based on one party or the other.
Influence on Ukraine.
Yeah.
An American reporter asked me, and I'm quoting it, I'm sorry, I'm asking it in the students' newsroom, but that was a question to me. And she asked so do you really think that if Donald Trump wins because he's speaking about not supporting Ukraine, that's it? And I was like, I've never thought about that way. So, of course, Ukraine wants to, you really don't want to be a hostage of the politics of the other country. And Ukraine relied on the bipartisan support. We can have our personal views and some of the things we can argue. So we do believe it's in the US interest for Ukraine to win and to Russia to lose, disregarding who is the leader of this country. It's really in the interests. Of course, we're concerned when J.D. Vance would speak about, we don't care about Ukraine, it's not important. I would prefer to persuade him it's important, but I don't know if we can do that. But the difference is, I told earlier about, missile strike. The lack of weapon, it's dead people, it's civilian casualties. Some kind of pause in support, we would survive it, but with a huge wounds and huge loss, which is unnecessary, which is totally unnecessary. And it would prolong the war, so non-support of Ukraine would prolong the war, would make it harder for the people, would cause more lives, would cost more money. But obviously, the life doesn't stop. You know that your life won't stop on November 7th, January 6th, January 20th, you'll have life disregarding what happens. And you might think in a different kind of way. Some people have extreme anxiety. We do have, but our life won't stop. And probably something else to say. I talked to quite a few American editors because I'm writing Foreign Affairs. My editors are super nice, they're incredible, but they need to kind of channel all this skepticism from audiences, from other editors. And so it's usually very same questions. How about the negotiations? How long Ukraine would ask for help? And I needed to formulate it to give this answer, which I'm saying that. And also I'm often very much, let's say, challenged even, especially if I'm speaking in Southern Hemisphere, in the countries which, have very strong anti-American views, why? And I said, look, who likes to ask for help? We all have our own dignity. It's not very pleasant to beg. It's not very pleasant. But if I believe that if I ask for something and it saves somebody, disregarding how unpleasant it's for me, disregarding how maybe I feel that I'm not so proud to ask. But if it helps, I would ask as long as necessary. But first of all, trying to prove that it's for good. It's not for something. I'm really asking that support because it matters. And also because I strongly believe in prevention. I strongly believe that in the end, if you don't stop impunity now, there would be more further. If you don't stop the crimes which are happening, or, there would be more and we would pay more later. So a lot of people might say I'm kind of naive, but I believe I'm absolutely pragmatic and very realistic, because we're living through that for quite a long time, and we do see if you don't do things on time, if you pause, if you back off, you pay a higher price later.
Natalia, thank you so much for this presentation and for your work that you do. You mentioned several times about democratic developments in Ukraine and revolutions, Orange Revolution, Revolution of Dignity. And we know that journalists play a huge role in that events, covering them and participating in these events. So my question is, do you think that activism became a part of journalism in Ukraine? And about your personal work as an independent journalist and now within this Reckoning project, how much activism and journalism do you balance in your work?
I don't do activism. I believe I don't do any. And what we do with the Reckoning projects, we're actually having even more thorough methodology compare how I did the journalist before, because I need to speak in a very neutral way. I need to have more evidence. I need to have a consent. I'm not advocating. And now, when I'm writing an article, we work with the lawyers, and my alleged is like in every single word. So I'm very cautious with the term, because I do work with the lawyers. So my journalism became better, because it's not, I actually don't really believe in advocacy journalism in some way. I stopped to believe in particularly that people, you can argue. I do believe that you need to put facts back, because emotions are, unfortunately, came to the human rights word is very much about the emotions. But I felt, and that's some of our research with the PAGL showed, people feel that they are manipulated. I'll mention, I feel pain. I work a lot in the Middle East. I should also explain that. I wrote a book about the Arab Spring, so I know a lot of people in the region. And Israel and Gaza, who cares? Nobody cares about each other's suffering, but there is so much of them. So people stop to hear, and my question is how you cut through. And that's why I'm speaking about the crimes. I'm not trying to argue. It's a crimes and accountability, disregarding what do you think. And a lot of international reporters, sometimes at the early stage of the war, they were asking me, can you be objective or something? I find these questions not uncomfortable, but let's say like that, not correct. Because I'll tell you the story. At the early stage of the war, I was in the village in Kherson region and met local firefighters. Local firefighters in the region. Can you imagine who are the guys who are village firefighters? Sometimes there is a fire in the wood. It's not California. We don't have that. And that's it. All of a sudden, they're under the bombs, and they need to keep the bodies of their neighbors. They need to stop, the fires of the houses. And they're like men in their 40s, 50s. I came to them, I approached them. There was not many journalists coming to that village. They all started to cry. I didn't know what to do. We started to figure out. And are they emotional? Yes. Do they care about their village? Yes. Do they do their job? They do. Am I, as a journalist, emotional? Yes, I am. I can cry. I do cry a lot. I think we have here people who are reading our testimonies. I don't know how our editor read through that, but I can cry reading through each of them. But it doesn't mean I don't do my job professionally. So I do think that the profession is something we need to preserve. You can have strong views on justice and what is a crime, what is not. What is a very important thing, sometimes you might be mistaken, but always it's about your integrity. How much have you done in order to check? So for me, the most important criteria of unbiased journalism, do you know that you didn't lie? Have you done as much as possible for you to feel your integrity? If you make a mistake, okay, ask for pardon after that. But if I know something is not true and I'm telling the truth, that's, I believe, not journalism. That's not how activism should be. So I do believe that it's a very important role of the journalist in this moment, because there is something we are trained, which nobody is trained. Bloggers, communicators, We are trained in checking the truth, checking the facts. It's our trained. It's not the volunteering. It's something we are trained how to go to the street and to check. This is sun, this is rain. No, I go and see. This is sun today, and half an hour later it's rain. It can be both at sometimes it is. That's the first thing. The second, don't forget, we are in between the people. We are the ones who can speak to the different members of the communities who disagree. And it's our professional role. It's not often the role of the government, of activism, political parties, but it's actually the role of the local journalists to be in the place where people disagree and talk to both of them in the way that maybe through this media they can hear each other. They wouldn't today in modern world hear each other directly sometimes, but you can do that. So there are very clear particular rules of these professions which actually are so unique and none can be, practiced by some other people who can just write, do express their view. So I do strongly believe in very professional journalism at this moment and why it's utterly needed anywhere.
I have the last question with a brief answer, and perhaps it should not be the last question with a brief answer, but you make a very powerful case for the impartiality of journalism and journalists and accurate, thorough reporting. And I'm wondering, during wartime, there's also collaboration. There's also potential crimes against, the invader or things that are considered crimes. Is there reporting on these issues? And I'm not saying that these are widespread, but I assume in most conflicts there's like slippages and, conflicts are complicated and people have different motivations. And so I'm wondering if you have encountered cases like this and how you go about treating, especially when the need for solidarity, the need also to counter Putin's very damaging, narrative of Ukrainian, participation, for example, in World War II, etc. These are very difficult topics, but I'm also wondering if 2 years after the beginning of the full-scale invasion, if there is, some kind of not reckoning, because I'm not even saying that it exists, but attention to whether this is happening at all.
So it's a very complex issue, and we do work with that. And why, for instance, it's a problem in the Ukrainian villages which were occupied and now deoccupied. Why it's discussion? Because why we seek so much for accountability? If those Russians are somewhere in the Kremlin or the soldiers are away, the people search for the local scapegoats. So they would speak about like a family which was giving the tea to these Russians. And we had the meeting of survivors with the prosecutors, by the way. We especially did the kind of town hall type of meeting. And where they would say that, that's not a war crime. There may be security service need to talk to these people, but it's not exactly the war crime. So there should be some explanation. But the problem is, and that's what we're trying to also explain to the Ukrainian authorities, if you don't investigate that, the people, and if nothing happens, people demand more severe punishment because they want at least something. So we had like a different kind of discussion. We did a special town hall on this particular issue to discuss what is considered to be collaboration with people of all kind of like who lived through that and figure out that the views are very different inside the communities. They can be very painful. So it's our way to approach that because we do believe it's a problem. The good thing, I don't know to what extent it's a good thing. The really, really important collaborators, they're all gone. They left with the Russians. They didn't stay. So it is complicated, but I give you a very interesting example. And it also tells a lot about Ukraine. So we had this town hall about discussing the collaborators. And we had a local priest. And all of a sudden, local priest asked the question, he would raise this question, said, but how about the people, how about the women who had sex with Russians? And we're like, whoa, that is something brought by the priest. And there was a discussion. And you know what this community agreed? This person cannot be punished for having sex with Russian soldiers. But she or he, she can be punished if she informed the Russian soldiers during their conversation about something which broken the Ukrainian law. And I find it extremely mature discussion, which I was like, wow, what is a discussion? What a nuanced discussion. But, there is this difference. I know it's kind of like pretty ideal case in the room of the town hall with the moderators. So probably this discussion would be totally different, like if we are not there, if we are not present. But I really appreciated that. I really appreciate that people think that way. And this pretty, it was a villages. It was a pretty rural area. It's usually not very, it's pretty conservative. But in the debate, they all agree people should be punished according to the law, and that's the only way which keeps us. They really think a lot about, in particularly, let's say, what we call oral history. They couldn't express themselves because sometimes they understand it's not a crime, but they need to have a meeting. So, for instance, in Ukraine, I finish with that. A lot of people try to bring this international practice of the truth commissions, things like that. And Ukrainians are like very skeptical because they often bring in this discussion, let's bring together Ukrainians and Russians, they would talk to each other and things would be sorted out. It's misleading, it won't happen. But these type of talks can be helpful for these communities because we understood that for some people, they understand it's not a crime. To support, it cannot be, it's not legal. But they want to have a public talk in the village to say that that person did that for the community. So it's said aloud, but not like a rumor. That's my hope, but it requires a lot of hard work. It's not taken for granted. There should be somebody of us coming there, talking, forcing this discussion. Because if you leave the void, the people would, do wherever they can do, and they can do a lot of wrong things because, of course, we also have the cases when people are charged with something for pretty minor crimes. That's also there, unfortunately.
What looks like journalists' role is also democracy building, right? So informing, but also conducting all of these town halls that encourage democratic practices. So thank you for coming to our small town hall. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.